Hello and welcome back to Crime Scene to Screen after a hiatus. I was about to say long hiatus, but let's be real, it has been quite some time. But Joe and I have decided to kickstart the podcast again, mainly because we like to try and fill our time with something a bit different, and because we just missed talking to each other about greasy, see, I'm missing two words together, gruesome and grisly tales. However, this time round, we are going to attack the pod slightly differently. We realised that focusing solely on murders possibly wasn't the right way to go. It might not be something that everybody wants to listen to. So this time round, we decided to review films based on crimes in general. Not just films either. We're going to be looking at some TV shows, and possibly some books as well down the way, just to broaden our horizons slightly. To kickstart our first episode back, we have watched and we're going to review Bernie, which was a 2011 film directed by Richard Linklater. Most of you will probably only know his other big hit, School of Rock. He took maybe a bit of a darker turn with Bernie, which also stars School of Rock lead Jack Black in the title role of Bernie Tiede. We have Shirley MacLaine, who plays Marjorie Nugent, and we also have Matthew McConaughey, who plays, and his name is on top of my tongue, the prosecutor, Danny Buck Davison. He's a district attorney. It's set in an East Texas town called Carthage, and the story is basically evolving around the relationship between Bernie Tiede and Marjorie Nugent. So before we go forward, welcome back, Joe.
Yes, it's good to be back, Therese.
Back.
I was just sitting in silence there and wondering, is she doing this by herself? I know, I know it's been a while, and she's been eager to go again, but I'm here.
You are here, sorry, and I've been staring at you directly the whole time at this point, waiting and wondering when I could bring you in, but I just thought after that brief introduction, we'll again, the hiatus that we had, have you been getting up to anything strange or startling over the past year and a bit?
No, not really. Still doing a few things with Banterflix, been doing some with Fright Club, and then outside of that, just, living life, getting out of the COVID times into something more normal.
And getting ready to get back into some juicy tales that we're looking at.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts after watching Bernie today?
Well, I'd seen it before about a year ago. I've always been sort of curious because I didn't even know it was a Richard Linklater film until we sat down to watch it. I was like, oh, I didn't know he made this here. I was just sort of intrigued about the story. I liked it, but the space between watching it the first time and seeing it now and reading more about it, especially the article it's based on, what's it called? Midnight in the Garden of East Texas by Skip Hollandsworth. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like it's a very biased look at Bernie himself. It's he's just a sweet man. He wouldn't do anything wrong. And when you actually read in a bit more and take other perspectives in the view, you're sort of in line with Danny Buck's views. He's tricked you all into thinking, he's sweeter than he actually is, mm-hmm. because there's stuff about Marjorie and there's stuff around the case in general that's omitted from the film. Whether or not Linklater's doing that on purpose, just to build a certain story around Bernie or not, but we'll get into it. But overall, I think it's well made. I really, really like the sort of the documentary approach where you have the talking heads mm-hmm. coming in and around the film, and the fact that is some of the townspeople from Carthage as well. It's a mixture of actors as well as them, but thought that was a nice touch because it gives it more authenticity, especially since it's their points of view. But still liked it for what it was. What about you? What did you think of Bernie?
I sort of came at it from a different view. I hadn't seen the film at all, so this was my first watch. But I'd heard plenty of podcasts and read up about the story before, so I suppose I had my own personal bias against Bernie himself. But the film gave me a different perspective in the sense of how sickly sweet it was toward, a man who I suppose will maybe never really know his manipulations, or his genuine reasons behind what he did before we get, the introduction into the film. But it's clear to see that everybody was duped, and probably still are, as well as not just the people who lived in Carthage, but Jack Black himself and Richard Linklater. We can come back to it later, but it was very eye-opening to me how much they actually had consulted Bernie on the film. Not to jump ahead, but there's a after the credits roll, there is a clip of Jack Black visiting Bernie in prison. Not to give any spoilers, because at the end of the day, it's crime scene to screen. Clearly a crime has been committed here, so we're not giving anything away. But yeah, it just, I don't know if it was shot with an intent to have bias toward Bernie as a message in terms of how the people who lived in Carthage felt about him, or was it actually the fact that Richard himself actually liked him and possibly maybe, believed the reasons he had done what he did, really. But I suppose before we go any further, do you want to set up the film? I know that we're going to try and take a different view in terms of how we approach these. So our plan is to go through the film and not dissect it piece by piece, because that would be extremely boring and very long.
Would just be Wikipedia.
But it would just be Wikipedia. And yeah, people have enough of that in their lives without us. But yeah, we're gonna go through the film, sort of hit the main plot points. We'll definitely refer to Skip Hollingworth's article, which is a really, really interesting read. And as Joe says, is what the film's based on. So we'll touch upon that as well, and also cover just, slightly different points, as we have said, that were left out of the film, which, to be honest, I personally think are quite important and probably should have been kept in. But without further ado, do you want to set us up today, Joe?
Yeah, no problem. So Bernie itself is basically just goes through the life of Bernie himself from about a few years before he meets Marjorie Nugent. So it starts off by just going into his background in terms of his position as an assistant director of a funeral home, but he works as a mortician. But through that role, he takes on various different practices within it, and he sort of acts like a comfort to those who are bereaved. Like, he would be very close to them, and he would sort of sing songs, and he was just, through that there, he gained popularity throughout the town. So it starts off with that there, and it sort of builds from that in terms of letting you know what they thought of him and how he was liked, and then it takes you up to the point where he meets Marjorie Nugent, who herself was a widow, and in the film she is someone who is very, very much disliked by everyone in town. She doesn't contribute at all to the community. She actively is, against a lot of people in the community. She's very nasty in her approach, and then it eventually leads to how, through her bereavement, Bernie sort of gets closer to her, and the two of them sort of form a relationship of sorts, and eventually the nature of that relationship turns sour, and it leads to Bernie murdering her, and then from there it deals with the subsequent trial. But before we go any further than that, I think it's best that we play a clip of the film.
What happened with Carl?
I got rid of him. I caught him red-handed. God knows what else he's been stealing from me, Bernie.
He says he was going to get it fixed.
That's what he says.
Well, I don't think Carl
And those flowers he supposedly planted, they're supposed to bloom 2 weeks ago. He is a lazy, good-for-nothing. The man's never done anything.
I don't think that he would ever do anything
Why are you sticking up for his kind?
Marjorie, you're making it very hard to be your friend. I'm going to come back some other time.
Oh, Just go ahead, desert me, just like everybody else. Go ahead. Go, you hate me.
Marjorie, I am not going to take part in this argument. You know I don't hate you, and that's fair.
I know you hate me.
No.
Like everybody else.
So that was a clip from Bernie. So, Therese, first thing I suppose to go through is the character of Bernie himself. What did you think of Jack Black's portrayal of Bernie? Since like you went into it knowing just how, knowing the man rather than the character in the film.
Mm-hmm. I can easily see, first off, how people probably wouldn't think that this was a true story. Jack Black, most people will know him as being a comedy actor. I don't think he's had very many serious roles, but what I would say is any role that he takes on, he embodies that person. I mean, you even have to look at him playing Bowser, an animated character in the most recent Mario movies. You know, he dressed up as Bowser at every premiere. Like, he fully becomes the character he's playing. And when you see sort of, in real life footage of Bernie, in comparison with how Jack plays him, it's like looking at twins. That he has it so spot on. The tone of his voice, his mannerisms, the look, everything is down to a T. Which I suppose brings the story alive, both from the film aspect, but I suppose also when you realise that that this is a true story. In the article Midnight in the Garden of East Texas, he's referred to as a chubby guy. And I mean, a lot of people probably would consider Jack Black a chubby guy, but not focusing so much on the weight element, but, someone who comes across as very bubbly, sociable, wants to get involved. He's part and parcel, plays the character very well. I'm trying not to use character so much because, again, it is a real person.
But it's his characterization, that's the difference.
Yes, yeah. That's right, his characterization. So I think he plays him very well. The opening scene, the film doesn't focus so much on Bernie's childhood. Both of his parents unfortunately died quite young. But there was no history of abuse or issues there. At school, he, some people maybe bullied him because they would say that he's quite feminine and he enjoyed musicals and things like that. But there wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. He went to university, got his mortician's degree, started off working in a small funeral home in Abilene where he grew up, and then was essentially poached, basically. So the start of the film starts off with Bernie giving a very in-depth display of how you prepare a body for burial, essentially. And it's evident from that he was a very skilled person. He was very good at his job. And then one of the first people that you actually speak to is his boss, Des, who, from the outset is just glowing with positivity for Bernie, was so respectful of his work. Everybody in the town loved him. He essentially could do no wrong. And you feel that throughout the film. He does hold that sort of persona of everything he does is not for himself, it's for other people. But I think in reality, what happens is that a lot of that gratification he gets is personally for his own self. It's not really in the grand scheme to help other people. It's to be known as someone who's good in the community, who's caring, who everybody talks about, who everybody wants to invite to their house for dinner. So yeah, he's known to become quite a character, which then on the flip side, whenever we see Shirley MacLaine's characterization of Marjorie, and again, from what you read about Marjorie, I do think it's very different. How did you think Shirley portrayed. I keep saying Shirley, thinking of Shirley. Don't Call Me Shirley from Airplane. And
Different Shirley.
different Shirley altogether.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of how Shirley portrayed Marjorie, just based on what you've read up afterward, how do you think she approached that?
Well, that's the thing. Like, going into this, like, the only thing I knew first time was what I seen on screen, and what you see in Shirley MacLaine's portrayal of Marjorie is just a complete and utter bitch. Just to put it, to no other way to put it. That's what she is, and she plays that so well. She's very sort of stony faced. She sort of really is begrudging of everyone around her. Like, one of the early scenes is she takes over the bank that her husband owned, and you can see, this is what was great about what Linklater done, that while the townspeople are sort of doing their background talking heads bits, the scene is basically this bank, sort of person that works in the bank has given this family a loan, granted loan, everyone's happy, leave. She's watching this whole thing from the background. She just walks up to his desk, takes the file, puts it in the bin, and walks away. She's like, they're not getting a loan, without saying they're not getting a loan. And then just the reaction to, like, the gardeners and stuff like that. There's a fella who's trying to give her a bill for fertilizer, and she just completely disregards it and beats it with a brush. And it goes into her strained relationship with her actual family in terms of her sisters. And when their mother died, she wanted so much from the will, even though she was, loaded. But it was more personal items, just to be a bit vindictive more than anything. Like, she seems like a very petty person, and you get that through what Shirley MacLaine does. Like, there's a key scene as well, I think. It's one of those moments that you can see, in terms of the film, where Bernie gets tipped over the edge a bit. It's whenever they're going for a meal in a Mexican restaurant, and she's continuously chewing her food, and he's constantly telling her, Marjorie, you know how much I hate this. Please stop doing that. Please stop doing that. And she keeps doing it and completely ignoring him. And you can see as their relationship develops, she becomes more controlling, from the film's perspective. And she's basically ordering him to do everything, and it reaches a point where she, like, tells him, you have to wear this pager at all times, and you have to do this, that, and the other, and be at my whim at all times. So in terms of all of that there, I think the film, in terms of the portrayal and what the intent was there, I think she does that character very well. But in reality, Marjorie was a very, very different person. So do you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so what I would say is I can imagine in real life she would have been a difficult person. She met her husband. The husband essentially had already came from money, but he was able to invest it quite well. They both moved to Carthage together, and they had met, got married, in their respective hometowns, and moved together. And when they got there, the husband had bought over the bank, in somewhere that I suppose is quite a small town. Everybody's going to know everybody, they're all going to have an opinion on you, and it was said that her husband sort of ruled the bank with an iron fist. There's not much ever really said about the townsfolk's, opinion of him. But it's very much insinuated that once he died, she sort of took up that post of replacing that iron fist as well. What I do think where the film goes wrong is that they take it and just run with it a bit too much. She was an 81-year-old woman when she died. She basically died on her birthday. She had just turned 81 that day. And what the film doesn't really look into is a lot of the other outside health problems that she did have. So, it was known that Marjorie had early onset dementia, which, is difficult enough for someone who, without Bernie being there initially, would be completely on her own, would have been used to a routine and the dependency of her husband. You pile that with the sort of level of control that she would have as manager of the bank, and probably the manager of a lot of the assets. Now, they do have, she does have her own investment broker, which does become quite involved in the story as well, Lloyd. However, for those of you who, out there listening, maybe who have experienced some with dementia or have heard of the certain symptoms, that element of control and sort of dependency is one of the symptoms there. So it would make sense that she would have got annoyed if Bernie didn't call her back or didn't say that he was going to be in a certain place at a certain time. And a lot of those horrible symptoms are something that, people who suffer from dementia just can't get rid of. As it gets progressively worse, so does their symptoms and so does their behaviour. So, the film fails to show that side of her, that she wasn't a well woman, and anybody, even if any sort of ailment that you have, if that's constant in the background, you're not going to be a very nice person anyway.
No.
And it's very sad to see that was never commented upon.
Well, that's the thing. Like, if you watch it, right, and without being told that, the whole time you just think, oh, she's just a grumpy old woman.
A horrible person, yeah.
Whereas if even somebody had dropped the line at some point saying, like, she's just out of a doctor's office or something, and then you find out that this is her condition, then you'd be like, oh, that explains it. That's why she's controlling. That's why she's very sort of needy in a sense, and all of that there stuff. Plus, as well as that, I think in the article, it does allude to that she had low levels of depression even before it stemmed from her husband's death. So she's got that, and then she's early onset dementia as well. So those two things combined as well just
mess with your head.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster, mentally and physically,
So, I would have loved to have seen more of a humanist side, I think, of Marjorie. I think they could have, if Richard Linklater had really wanted to pose it, that she was this, vehement bitch the whole way through, which I think he successfully does. I tried to look to see if there was any comment from her family about the film, and I couldn't really find very much, and I think it's possibly down to the fact that they were quite estranged before and leading up to her death. But if I'd found out that someone had portrayed my grandmother, regardless of the relationship you had, like that, I would be raging. I think they should have included some sort of additional human element, and if they wanted to spin the story in the way I suppose the townsfolk really had seen the story, is, comment on the fact, as you say, that she's attended a doctor's appointment, she's early onset dementia, use that as a derivative in the plot to go forward to say, here's why she became so needy, but, Bernie doesn't need to tell anybody that she has dementia. He could have still used his narrative to say, oh, she's perfectly fine, she's grand, she's just very controlling. Even, after he murders her, there's a period of 9 months essentially where no one knows where she is. And in the film, he tells people, particularly her family and the investment broker, oh, she's spending time in a nursing home. If they'd commented upon it again, that, she had the dementia, depression, heart problems, anything like that, there might have been a plausible element of it there, but it's the fact to just say, oh no, she's just been shipped off to a nursing home.
Yeah, and then he sort of keeps the lie going, oh no, but then she had a stroke, just to sort of build that up. But at the same time, even if he had said it there and then, after the murder, like, oh, she's, in the hospital or something with whatever health condition, you could tell then from the film's perspective that's just a big lie from Bernie, because he's just covering his tracks. So I think you would have needed that beforehand. Like, you would have, maybe around their initial meetings, like, the only thing that indicates health conditions are her pills, but it doesn't go into that at all. Like, Bernie organised her pills, and then they're out for a meal and he forgets to bring them down to dinner, and she's like, I have to have these pills before dinner, and she's very blunt with them. But it doesn't go into it beyond that there, which then makes me think, I'm just thinking out loud here in terms of, going through the film now, because I'd literally just finished watching it before recording it. I think that's all to do with Linklater's intention. I think he's doing this because he wants to structure the film in terms of we as an audience are going and listening to these opinions of everyone in town who liked Bernie, who don't know the full truth or don't want to know the full truth. They just want to know,
just about him. Yeah.
About him, and like, oh no, he's our charming neighbour. We all love him so much. He might have killed her, but it doesn't matter because she deserved it. So I think that's the point of the film. It's all about us as observers going into this small town and seeing their perspectives rather than getting the truth. We're getting a truth, like the town's truth, not
the actual
facts. Yeah. So
I would agree with you on that point, and I think that also then speaks volumes of the fact that, when they do go to that, and I do think the documentary element of it is a really good device that Linklater's taken in, because it makes you think that you're watching like a Netflix true crime documentary or something like that.
This kind of predates all that craze as well, because
it does.
2011? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting take, I suppose, on it.
Yeah.
But at no point does anyone be interviewed in favour of Marjorie, even up to a point at what, her sister is actually interviewed, but on behalf of Bernie, and, kind of goes and speaks to Bernie and comments on, I know my sister was a bitch. She used to tear up my homework. She used to tear up this in the house. She's probably tearing you apart, type, things like that. And even someone like her investment broker, Lloyd, who I suppose is concerned for his commission, really and truly, but he does, at one point he is spoke to about his relationship with Marjorie and also Bernie's relationship, and even he can't have anything nice to say about her. He kind of says that for us it's a purely business relationship, but she's difficult to work with or difficult to be around. So not having that element there, I suppose, as you say, dictates how the audience is supposed to feel. And maybe if I had maybe watched this film before knowing about the story, I would maybe have had a different opinion. I mean, ultimately, all in all, the fella's guilty, and he definitely manipulated her for her money.
Oh, absolutely, because that feeds back to what you were saying about how he would take the money. Well, even before that, he was sort of like a shopaholic. Like, he would go in the places, he would just buy stuff around him. Like, the film goes in that too, but it doesn't go into, well, maybe that's why he shacked up with Marjorie, because it does mention about how he owed the IRS something like $4,000 in back taxes, and how
he was behind on car payments for his car and finance payments. He was behind on his mortgage.
Yes.
And he was only earning the equivalent of
like $20,000.
$18,000 a month. It was 18, yeah.
There you go. Like, that's all missing. Although it is implied in a sense that he's using Marjorie for her money to an extent. When he starts spending her money in different stocks, and then when he does eventually kill her, he's sort of trying to absolve himself in a way by going, oh, well, I'm going to take all that money and do all these wonderful things in the community by, like, building an extension on the church, opening up different stores and stuff like that there. But that's still in line with who he was, or who he tried to project himself as to this community. So in a way, that's what I'm just curious about. When it comes to him actually killing Marjorie, in what way do you think that was premeditated, or you just seen an opportunity to kill her? Like, how much of it do you think is premeditated?
I don't think he's intelligent enough to have planned it. As someone who, for their job, deals with dead people on the regular, he probably could have put a plan in place. He's around these sort of dealings with people every day. Understanding people's estates, how that works, how to set up a funeral. He knew that she wasn't well, she had dementia, she had problems with her health. He didn't need to kill her. Like, I was listening to a podcast earlier, and one of the points for me was like, in no way would it be fair if he waited around till she died, but she essentially did the hard work for him. She signed over her full estate to him, absolving all of her family from that. He didn't need to kill her.
No,
If he
absolutely. He
wanted
could have,
her money, he could have just stuck around.
because
She was
there
an
is that.
81-year-old
Yeah.
woman who wasn't well. You know, she wasn't going to live him.
No, well, pending like horrible health incident or accident, but at the
Yeah.
same time, there is that other crucial scene where he's talking to the investment broker, going through all these bonds, like, yes, I want to buy this in Apple and, you know, different companies, and then he's like, why are you spending all her money, more or less? This is insane. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And then the response to that is, he hangs up on Bernie, but then she, overhearing the conversation, picks up the phone and goes, don't you be nasty to my Bernie, more or less, and then just hangs up on him, like threatens him.
No,
because
she gives him everything on a silver platter. Like,
yeah.
he got everything he asked for without doing very little work.
No.
I think it was a break. I think he had a breakdown.
Oh yeah, I think it was a case of maybe it's just pushed to the edge. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
I'd wait this woman, but I can't live with her anymore. I can't live this life anymore. So I'm just going to pick up this rifle beside me and shoot her in the back 4 times. And that tells you it wasn't even a crime of passion, the fact that he did it 4 times, I think. Because
he wanted to make sure she was dead. Yeah.
Well, he does go in that when he actually confesses. He says, I didn't want her to feel any more pain. And you're like, but you shot her 4 times in the back. You know,
in the head as well. Like,
I can't remember where exactly it was shot. So where was it? Sorry.
I think there was 2 shots in the head and then 2 in the back. You shoot her in the head, she's gone. The woman's dead. Like,
and then the fact then afterwards, just to cover his tracks, he just pots her body in the freezer.
Yeah.
And just leaves it there.
Yeah.
But then he's like, oh well, I want to bury her eventually, but like, were you really going to do that? Or are you just going to wait till you get caught? Because you would have done something sooner.
I also don't think he ever thought he would have got caught either.
Yeah, because I think, he just had this holier than thou sort of attitude around town. He could do anything he wanted and everyone would sort of be at his beck and call because he's such a lovely fella. And like it was mentioned before, the fact he did all those kind things for the community after her death, you know, like he went into overdrive with that stuff. You know, the fact that he did that made them think, I've got this shield around me, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, it was almost to overcompensate.
Yeah, that's the word.
Essentially from what he was doing. I think at this point it's good to sort of go into the levels of expenditure that he had.
Go into.
I mean,
it's great.
We know, we know, as Joe touched upon, in his own personal life, Bernie did have financial troubles. He wasn't earning that much money really at the funeral directors. He's behind on all these different payments, but he always lived way above his means. You know, his sister commented upon in the fact that anywhere he would go, he would always buy 3 of something. So if he had, you know, in the film, I think it's depicted on that there's a clock in like the local supermarket and it's the most ugliest looking clock ever, covered in birds or something.
Buy 6 of them.
He buys them but gives them away. Anything that he bought, again, way above his means, even before he had any of the wealth sort of signed over to him, it was all to give away and it was all for show. Now, when you go to the talking heads and the documentary style, and again, very interesting that they included, you know, most of the people who actually lived there. So, you know, it's an element of, I wouldn't say mockumentary, but it's a mix of the two. There's a blurred line between the truth and, you know, the sort of false narrative that's told. But, you know, you hear him, you know, calling to all these older women's houses and offering to do this and offering to pay for that. And always being sort of the person's shoulder to cry on. Then whenever he moves to Marjorie, although there was a woman before Marjorie, I think that this wasn't included in the film, that I had read as part of the article. It was a woman, Grace, who was again probably in the same age range as Marjorie. Her husband had passed away, and Bernie took it upon himself to basically be at her beck and call. But then shortly after is whenever Marjorie's husband died, and everybody had known the Nugents in the community. So it's kind of hinted to in the article that, he seen dollar signs as soon as Mr. Nugent died, and he immediately jumped, sort of to be there, and I'm using speech marks, be there for her, which is depicted again quite good in the film, that initially she's very standoffish, doesn't want to give him any time. He constantly turns up at her house buying this, buying that, again, buying someone's affection, which I think is what he did, not only with Marjorie up to a point, but on a wider scale to the people of Carthage. He did things to buy their affection. One of the main, and a lot of these assets are seized. There's a point in the film after he's arrested.
The feds come in.
And the assets are seized because he ends up spending like close to 50,000 more than that. Like it's millions, the amount that he actually ends up spending. And as you mentioned, Joe, it was buying people's houses. He bought 10 cars. He bought a struggling family some sort of garden, outside garden house, greenhouse thing that was like a full on swings and slides. He bought an extension of the church. The church was named after him. He set up a foundation in Marjorie's name after she died, like all this mental stuff. And then when they were together, as you'd already touched upon as well, he sort of embedded himself in those financial decisions. So seeing where she was investing her money, deciding where they would be going on holiday, traveling first class, going on a cruise, all this different types of stuff, going to these different shows, and kind of approaching it in the sense that it was Marjorie that was bringing him along, when I think in all reality it was him convincing her to take action on, go to this show, put money into this play. Like one of the big things is he, as we commented upon, he's really fond of musicals, so he gets himself involved in the local dramatic scene, and he ends up funding a load of these shows through the wealthy benefactor of Marjorie Nugent, who's a big fan of musicals, which in reality wasn't true at all.
No, she sort of just went along with it.
She just went along with it.
Than anything. Yeah.
Do you want to, talk upon, I suppose, as you'd mentioned earlier, the scene between sort of the the investment broker, and how Lloyd gets involved, and the sort of guy who plays him in the film, but also then in comparison to the real life Lloyd, who essentially helps in finding Mrs. Nugent.
That's the thing, like the film portrays that whenever Marjorie dies, no one really cared, beyond like a few phone calls going, where's Marjorie, what's she up to, and then he's spinning the lie, she's in the she's in a home, or she's in a hospital with her stroke. But then it's Lloyd's sort of involvement in going, there's a lot of irregularities here, and it's Bernie who's signing off on more or less everything now. Like Marjorie's no involvement at this stage. Mm-hmm. So and the fact that the expenditures, exponentially just going overboard as well. It's like, hang on, this is unsustainable. What's going on here? And then that's when he gets involved, and he gets local police involved as well. But you were saying before the call, see, I'm not as familiar as yourself probably with this here. They were called, but then they waited for like a month after the call before they went, well, maybe we should look into that just to keep him quiet. And then that's when they eventually discover her body. Yeah. But the thing we haven't really gone into, and I think it's, the key feature of the film is Danny Buck and the role he played. Like the film portrays him as sort of this cowboy detective in a sense. Like he's someone who acts on their hunch and instinct. They're constantly looking for trouble that's out there rather than waiting for it to come to them. And when you read the article about, in which he's been interviewed in, like he seems like the only sane person in it. He's like, well, hang on, why are you still defending this man? This has been so many years since this case, and he's confessed to actually doing this, yet you're still defending him. And then they always twist the narrative. It sort of is like when you see the world today in terms of people's reactions. Like, you could hold up the truth in front of someone, but if they're so convinced, they've convinced themselves so much to their own lie, they're going to go with the lie because I know it's just a thing now. Maybe people just don't like to admit they're wrong anymore.
It just suits them better.
Yeah, it's like, no, just double down. It's fine. But anyway, we're not going to go in that aspect of things because it leads us down political roads, and that would be horrible because reality is horrible. But yeah, back to Danny Buck. The thing that I found funny this time watching it, like he's played by Matthew McConaughey, but after reading that article, and the article contains pictures of everyone involved, like there's Bernie, there's Marjorie, and Lloyd, like you were alluding to, and the film kind of gets them fairly accurately in terms of how they look. And then we get to Danny Buck, and you're like, you look like the dad from Frasier.
It is off kilter.
You know, you're not Matthew McConaughey, lad.
No way.
Even if you were to de-age him like 10 years from the pictures, you're like, no. Not to say that McConaughey's bad. I did like his portrayal of that character, and the sort of gung-ho approach to him. But yeah, looks-wise, I don't think so. I think it's only because you've done films with Richard Linklater before, he's familiar with you, and he knows what he can get from you, so in terms of a portrayal, so that's why you see in the film. But I did like how that sort of goes back to the narrative of like we're getting the town's perspective, because the town's perspective of Danny is, he's just this cowboy detective. He just wants to get what he wants rather than the truth, even though the truth is very different in reality. Like in the film, he sort of is over exaggerated at times, but that's maybe not what Danny Buck actually is. He's someone who's lived in Carthage for about 50 years, and then he was a DA for 3 years before this case rolled along. And, he just seems someone who's like, no, I just want to get the truth. I want to get to the bottom of these things. I don't judge, whether someone's charming or not, or if they're liked or not. That is inconsequential. What matters to me is what happened to this woman and who's to blame. But what did you think of the role of Danny Buck, not only in the film, but like sort of in real life? Like, what's your thoughts on Danny?
I mean, Matthew McConaughey, I personally think that he's a very one-note actor.
Okay.
Knives Out for that's controversial. I respect him. I think he's a good actor. I just think, or maybe it's the fact that he's been typecast in so many of these types of roles where he plays like a Texan cowboy country boy. I love True Detective. I love what he's done on that. He's great in Wolf of Wall Street, Dallas Buyers Club. But this, to me, I don't know, it's almost like a parody of himself. Because I suppose in real life he does sort of come across as that suave, straw on his mouth sort of cowboy. I do think that not McConaughey's acting, but I think the film does Danny Buck a disservice because he is so much more, and he's so much more important to the story. Matthew McConaughey really isn't in this very much. And when you read the interview with Skip and Danny Buck, he in real life he was very hands-on from the beginning and was very involved. You only see sort of a sprinkling of him in this, but what I do respect and what I do think brings a bit of a realness to the story is that much in like in the reality, he's the one going around everybody being like, he murdered a woman. Like, you all seem to forget that he shot this woman 4 times in the head and in the back. He then, didn't give her the dignity of someone who's a funeral director, didn't give her the dignity of burying her. He stuffed her in her own freezer and covered her with steak bake and chips or whatever it was in the freezer. No matter what anybody thought of the woman at the time, Bernie clearly really didn't give her any respect at all. Even though, all he does is wax lyrical about how much he loved her and how much sad she's gone, and, it was all manipulation and things like that. But he is the voice of reason throughout. And particularly, in those scenes where, there's one which sticks out, and it's the Sunday service after Bernie's been arrested, and they attend the church, which the rec centre is so aptly named after Bernie Tiede. And the priest gets up and in his sermon, he basically asks God and the congregation to pray for Bernie and his soul, because he's done no wrong and we're here for him, and it's all a misunderstanding. And, you know, it focuses in on Matthew McConaughey, and he's just sitting there in disbelief, and he confronts the pastor after, and he said that, you know, you're a God-fearing man. You know he's guilty. In the eyes of God, he's committed a sin. You know, how can you stand up there and thank him and, you know, wish him well? And, you know, the pastor turns around and says, oh, only God can judge, and, you know, we'll give Bernie all the support he needs. The only reason you're supporting him, and I think this is what it said, is because Bernie gave the church money, over $10,000 or whatever it is.
For that new wing.
You know, for that new wing that you've got, which is probably true.
Oh, absolutely. They're just seeing the money out of it more than anything.
And I think the whole town's people seeing the money, you know, the additions of those shops, everybody getting a new car, the money going into the chapel, you know, the sort of fake generosity that Bernie had, and all the while Danny Buck's going through being like, please, everybody, catch yourselves on. This is a murder case. Which his actions also, I suppose, helped convict Bernie, as the original court was going to be held in the town of Carthage. And for somewhere that is so small, they didn't have enough people to be able to be unbiased on the jury. So they moved the court then to the town over, who don't really know the story very well, don't really know Bernie very well, and thankfully are able to deliver a guilty verdict against him.
To be impartial, essentially.
And to be impartial, but a lot of the times people do attend and are interviewed after, and, you know, they're still in just utter disbelief. That are very warm and loving Bernie could do this to anybody. And even to this day, Bernie is still in jail. But the article itself, the incident happened in the mid to early 90s. The interview is 1998. There's been a couple of interviews recently, with Danny Buck, and a lot of the townspeople are still not convinced that it wasn't self-defense or it was manipulation, and that Bernie should be freed, essentially.
Well, that's, I mean, you look at the film, well, that's how the film exists in the way it exists now, because, well, I know it was made in 2010, 2011, but the fact that they're using the same people and they're still willing to go, yeah, I'll say he's innocent, because I still believe that he's innocent.
How many years after? Yeah.
Well, about roughly 10, even
10 or 11 years.
10.
Yeah.
And they're still like, yeah, he's innocent. But I suppose that's a good way to sort of go to his arrest, because when he was arrested, he openly confessed. Like, he didn't go, oh no, I didn't do that, somebody's hid her in the freezer, oh no, none of this stuff. Like, he didn't try and cover it up, he just broke down, and that was it. But I don't think the film goes into sort of the reasons why he so easily just confessed our arrest, because they found in his, I don't think it was Marjorie's place, I think it was his actual place.
It was, yeah.
There were like something over 50 illicit videotapes involving men, which sort of fed into the sort of town rumours and gossip of, you know, to quote, someone said, oh, he's light in his loafers, you know, with their casual homophobia towards him, but they're like, but it's Bernie, so he's fine. We don't, you know, like when you think of like...
He's a nice person, so it's okay, and it's like...
Yeah, because he even goes...
Not really... Yeah, you know, you're still being homophobic here.
Yeah, it's like, I don't, you know, I think it's one of the times women says, oh, I don't think Bernie was gay because he's God-fearing man. Something along those lines, and you're like, well, that doesn't make much sense, but okay. But yeah, there's the casual homophobia of the town as well. But I think that creates the more authentic picture of the town, rather than just going, oh, we're just going to cut all that out together. I'm glad he sort of included that, so we get a fuller understanding of the community. Because it helps, you know, it actually just feeds into the sort of madness within their logic, and like, well, if he's this kind of person, and, you know, traditionally you think of someone like that as, you know, something's wrong with them, but you don't care because it's Bernie, you know? That's why I'm glad it's sort of kept in. Yeah. It's included even as an undercurrent, because it's more authentic. But then, I suppose I'm going to take this opportunity and maybe play a clip of Bernie in prison now, and sort of him going into the reasons why he did what he did and his confession. So I'm just going to play it here.
I don't know exactly what caused that morning to happen. I called her and I said, we're going to Longview. I'm going to run to take my clothes to the cleaners. Would you like to ride with me? We'll go to Hunan's and eat some Chinese food. And she said, yeah. And so I went out there to go and pick her up. And I don't know, it was just, she was starting nagging at me. It's about something.
He says still to this day, he doesn't know what got into him.
I don't know really how that felt, but it felt like that because it was really, I got scared, I got scared, and I didn't know what to do.
So yeah, that was Bernie in prison now. I think he's not due to parole until he's around 71 years of age. I think it's like 10 years down the line or even less until he can go out for parole. But funny thing is, when I was doing a little bit more research, he was in the news yesterday. Yes, he's still sort of, it was just like a brief headline in the Independent. I was reading the article and basically he's fighting for better air conditioning in Texan prisons. So, he's still using the old charm to try and get his own way.
Man.
God-fearing man wants to get that cold air in those hot prisons. But yeah, apparently in prison, you think of someone like Bernie going into like a maximum security prison, you're like, oh, they're going to eat him alive. Nope, they like him. He's well liked. He's getting on well. So it just goes to show how he can just easily manipulate and charm people just from his general demeanour and likeness. And the film really does a great job at doing that. So you can see how that would continue on. But I suppose winding down and things now, have you any sort of other thoughts in around Bernie or anything we should have went over?
I mean, I think we touched the main point in the story is that, Bernie Tiede essentially came from nothing. He found an opportunity. He manipulated that opportunity, and for a short period of time, 9 months, he was able to live a life that he never could have. All at the expense of murdering a very vulnerable older woman, who had no one in her corner, was completely alone. She wasn't perfect either. We're not trying to advocate for Marjorie either, because, she tried to steer her own family. She was horrible to her sister and her own parents and things like that. But, no matter how much of a horrible person you are, you don't deserve to be shot in the back of your head, unbeknownst to anything, by someone who you also, really trusted and really loved. On the other side of that then, it's fascinating that a single person could fool so many people and still fools these people to this day. Not only just, the actual townspeople of Carthage, but funny enough, both Richard Linklater and Jack Black.
Yes, go into that, because, you were telling me about this and I couldn't believe it.
So, when this story came about, Richard Linklater, I suppose, to probably try his best to be as authentic as he could, essentially, in the story, was that Bernie was released from prison as a sort of work release for a short period of time, and during that time he lived with Richard Linklater and essentially consulted on the film, which I don't know if that breaches all sorts of bias ethics or I don't know. And also Jack Black consulted him quite a bit, as I'd mentioned. The end of the film, there's a video of Jack meeting him in prison, who he met on numerous occasions. It was said that there was revisions of the script that Bernie looked over. It almost as if he had manipulated Richard himself to be involved in the film as he did. Bernie Tiede apparently speaks very highly of the movie and the depiction. And as we know now, he fully admitted to the murder. and is atoning for his sins in prison. You know, he runs a crafts club and a choir and, you know, all these different things. But him and Richard Linklater are still quite in contact. So, you know, when I found this out, I just thought it was mad. It was utter madness. You know, yes, he's not in the grand scheme as the likes of Richard Ramirez or, you know, Joe Gacy, multiple serial killers, but at the end of the day, he's a man who was capable of murdering an older woman and hiding it. You know, not that it would have made any difference if he had murdered her and then immediately phoned the police. He hid the woman for 9 months. He was obviously trying to cover his back. And all the while, you know, someone who, as a director, you would aim to tell the story from both sides, but to me, it really heavily swayed toward favouring Bernie, to be honest. I don't know what you think, Joe.
No, I think I agree with what you're saying, but I still think there's that perspective in the back of my head where he's trying to tell from a town's perspective and is faithful to the article in terms of, you know, this is this town, this is what they think. So I'm going to sort of like take, like say us from like Ireland, take us to East Texas, to Carthage, and this is what they think. So sit down and listen to their story of Bernie. Not the story of Bernie, their story of Bernie. So I think that's what he was doing. But at the same time, you know, you live with someone like that and they're consulting you on the phone. In the back of your head, you're constantly being charmed this way. You're like, well, maybe he wasn't so bad. You know, he's nice. He made dinner tonight. You know, he did this, that, or the other. Yeah. And you would just maybe have that play in your mind. And that sort of maybe comes through with Jack Black's portrayal, because there's only like sort of one moment where sort of the mask slips, in a sense, where darkness sort of overcomes him, and that's when he kills Marjorie. So I think overall that's sort of the intent, but that's just my perspective on things.
So I think as we wind down, there's one quote that I would like to finish on, that I hope sort of speaks volumes both of the film and sort of the opinion. And it's taken from the article. If we haven't already plugged it enough, it's almost as if we had written ourselves. But again, it's from Midnight in the Garden of East Texas by Skip Hollingsworth. If you're really interested in the story, you know, it's a Google away. It's a really interesting read. And I know a couple of podcasts that I've listened to had referenced this as well. It's sort of, you know, goes into Marjorie's background a bit better and kind of gives you an understanding of her perspective. But, you know, as while they were being interviewed, one of the city councilmen had spoke to Skip Hollingsworth and had said, from the day that deep freeze was opened, you wouldn't have been able to find anyone in town saying, "Poor Mrs. Nugent," said City Councilman Olin Joffrin, a respected Carthage insurance agent. People here are saying, "Poor Bernie." So I think that all in all just shows and sums it up, this absolutely mental story. If you were to give it, what would you give it out of 5, Joe?
3.5. I give it a 3.5, but because I think it is a good film. I think it's a well-made film, but once you understand the true story, you can't really give it too much credence. But then it goes back to, you know, the intention of Richard Linklater in making it and how that was maybe compromised through his close connection with Bernie. But what about you? What's your... I
would agree. I would say a 3.5. Coming to this knowing the story beforehand, I suppose I had my own presumptions anyway. I really respect the direction taken in terms of the docu sort of style with it all. It's not shocking in any sense. You know, there's no gore, there's no you know, shock, there's no awkwardness. Some people would say that it's maybe like a black comedy, like, you know, there is funny parts to it, but I think it shines a lighter tone to something that is quite dark, you know, ultimately, all in all. I think if you came to the film without knowing anything previous, you would take it as it is. But, you know, much like yourself, knowing the full story, to me, shameful, the sort of portrayal of Marjorie. We'll never really know who she was because unfortunately she's dead. A lot of her family don't speak much about her. But yeah, hopefully, you know, he has another 10 to 15 years in prison. He'll probably get early parole by the signs of how he's behaving. Everybody thinks he's God's gift.
Move in with Richard.
Move in with Richard, probably do Bernie the follow-up or something. But ultimately, the main thing here is that the man was convicted. He has spent his time in jail. Unfortunately, it won't bring Marjorie back. No. But you know, it's a very different way of telling a dark story. Let's just say. But yeah, that was Bernie by Richard Linklater. I'm not too sure if it's on any streaming at the minute.
It is. It's on Amazon Prime. I meant to say that from the beginning because that's where I watched it. So Amazon Prime. It's where you go for your Bernie fix.
And yeah, if you want to look at any other Richard Linklater, I mean, the only other film you need to watch is School of Rock because it's one of the best.
He isn't confused. Boyhood.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, he's
a lot more.
See, he's one of those directors where you watch the films and you're like, who is this? And then,
I'm forgetting about the cultural element and I'm just going solely for the pure entertainment. So if you want to be entertained, watch School of Rock. If you want something a bit more artsy, cultural, have a wee look at Boyhood or Dazed and Confused.
Aye. So I think that's the best place to leave it. So, it's good to be back, Therese. And this will hopefully be the start of a run that'll go on a bit longer than last time. And we're hoping to do this monthly again. We don't know what we're going to do next, or even if we might have guests or whatever, but just keep an eye out on the likes of our socials and that there, and we will hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.